可能是 accounting 开头。那个我的笔记本的是那个什么？还是翻这个快，翻电子版的多。把我的那你还给你，你还挺自豪的。
没自豪，只是右而已。
右而言。
你的 name tag 是什么保存完后无所谓。
反正你在对你在保留。
我也
保留会受损。然后在这儿 acquisition。就是你会这个资产账面不会错。哦。比如说 undervalue overvalue。
acquisition。
这个就是优惠的。
我知道怎么 calculate。
就是你付的钱减去，你本来就是有 undervalue 和 overvalue， 这个东西你提前告诉你，在定价中，然后这个定价加 book value， 然后和你付的钱之间差距是 goodwill， 三者加在一起。
OK。市值减去。
你给我紧张刺激的。
就市值减去 book value。
在接近吧，那个 对，应该是 overvalue undervalue。是紧张刺激的原因。
我怎么了
？undervalue 和 overvalue。undervalue overvalue 对不对？
在哪边？
对，因为如果这样它不会有。你的那个 fair value identical assets 里包含。
说过。
对啊，说过价。
嗯。
我的记法是把 undervalue 和 overvalue 所有的一并会加上 undervalue 和 valuation 所有的那个 assets 加上。在这儿 fair value 子公司的放的它整体的 fair value 的 value 正常，我后边的。
都是感觉。No one card。No one card。
在里边去吗？你要
好。
你好理智。对哦。
因为固定了
就 data 3。
Sorry, I don't even want. She's gonna like laugh. It's not in my foot.
Being dropped, but also
30了吧？
这是写错名词。
因为是那个一次很少，就后来
对。
等一下，我这个就是一个 case。
从哪买的？哦，我也没做。我他们还有刚好是。
You're at the end. You did. Yeah, true. So
他们这里的对我是理解。
还得有。
天，那想我去投去。啊？很忙活。是啊。也还在忙走。男的，我说，我觉得挺好看。I was thinking that too.
We are just talking about this.
Thank you so much. I think so. 老师好贴心啊。So someone else was nervous. Yeah, it's just not. 还帮我遮。 没人传，这个对啊，是这样。
有的时候真的是很难理解，把他的功夫一扫。
And she was like, 我相信你俩的。
Okay, it's 2:30. We'll start in 1 minute. We'll give people time to try again. It's good to start on time, if at all possible. I know people are coming across campus and whatnot, but I always hate it when people come in after I've given the big message, like, don't forget this class. And then people walk in 2 minutes later. It's like, oh, okay, I hope they get the message. Okay. Okay. I'll go ahead and pass today's sheet around. Arun. There we go. Well, big news, Michigan won the national championship in basketball, for those of you who care. That's big news. My daughter's postdoc at Michigan, so we watched the game. It's pretty exciting. Okay, 2:31 it is, so it's time to roll. Welcome. And Sandra, Maya. Okay, as far as our day-to-day, as far as the final exam goes, we're set for most people April 29, 8:30 to 11:30 a.m. I've sent messages to like 5, 6, 7 people that I thought might have had a conflict. And I have arranged a time with Gray and Beja and Jacob and Claude, who's not here right now. If I will confirm to you, if you have a different time, I'll send you a confirmation. That means I put you on my calendar and I'll be in my office. So if you can't be there, if you have any issues like that, you need to let me know and we'll communicate back and forth. Okay. In terms of recapping the last session, I'll show some things here in the overhead just for a minute, but we talked about FCPA and Foreign Corrupt Practices Act and Walmart kind of as a broad ethical issue. How do you maintain an ethical standard across international boundaries? It's not an easy thing to do. And then we started on WorldCom and we talked about the different options that they were using to manipulate their income. From cookie jar, what we call cookie jars, which could be bad debt estimations. It could be warranty reserves. It could be reorganization expenses. Anything where there's an estimate is a playground. Okay, and they were using their cash flow from they were using acquisitions to kind of improve their cash flow from operations on a regular basis. So what we'll do is we'll wrap that up a little bit. I want to talk about the ethical workplace. And corporate social responsibility. The ethical collapse thing, as I go through this, I realize that section might really be good as a wrap up, because when you go through, Bernie Ebbers, then Richard Scrushy, then John Stumpf, you look at these leaders of organizations that go sideways to ethics, and you start to see the importance of the leader. How significant they are and the culture they create inside the organization, and why people collapse underneath it. Why do the regular people not stand up against this? And so much more on that on Richard Scrushy. Okay, which is your assignment for Thursday, right? Your group submission will be on Health South, Richard Scrushy and his family team. And then we'll also have another case called Resign or Serve, much shorter case. Okay, so keep that in mind. Any questions? Okay. Okay, so as I'd said in the intro there, just a quick recap from the Walmart case, the whole corporate culture thing. You might want to look at the PowerPoints on this particular slide on what you need in terms of maintaining ethics at a global scale. This was not created by me. This was created by Bud Kalesa of ITT, formerly of ITT Automotive. Had a vast experience in this, and these were the things he thought were very important from having a corporate code of ethics, kind of a global one, but making sure that the people in the other countries understood what that meant and that they could interpret. They understood what it meant in their culture and how they had to go by basically by U.S. standards or exchange standards. That was what the requirement was, and it wasn't a negotiable. It was not a negotiable, and they needed to understand that in their language. They need to understand that and to work that out in their own community. Okay, so that was one thing. In terms of WorldCom, we talked about reorganizations. I've redone the notes on that a little bit if you download, just to make sure you understand that this reserve for planned reorganization, how they were using it at WorldCom, but it could be any estimate. On a sunny day, I overestimate warranty costs. I overestimate bad debt, and when things in a rainy day when business isn't so good, then I pull some of that back. Okay, that's basically the idea behind the reserves. And we talked about the acquisition accounting. Mainly, the main thing there, and you can walk through my example on the PowerPoints. The main thing is it's going to alter your cash flow from operations. That's the big impact is there. So it looks like cash flows are very, very positive, more positive than they really are, because you're basically converting investments. You're converting when you acquire someone, you're converting their expenses, their cash flow outflow from operations into the financing section, and it alters the presentation to the public. Okay, so here's where we left off. We talked about why Andersen didn't catch this, and there's whole books written about the collapse of Arthur Andersen. I've read at least a few of those books, and I'll say the main thing with Arthur Andersen at that time was that they were all about making money. They were all about making money, and it put so much pressure on the auditors that they didn't want to lose big customers like WorldCom, and they were just not looking hard. They were just not looking hard. And so you could say the same thing about Enron. They were more willing to go along with the client than they should have been. And ultimately, that was Arthur Andersen's downfall. They lost money and they got sued in WorldCom. EY had the same problem. You're going to find out with HealthSouth. They also got sued and lost. But Arthur Andersen lost a lot, and ultimately, because of Enron and WorldCom, Arthur Andersen ended up going out of business. And I'll tell you a little funny thing about this. When accounting firms go out of business or they get in trouble, no one's going to be there to help them. Okay, no one's going to be. What do I mean by that? What happens when if your firm gets into trouble, what's going to happen is all of the competitors, they're going to come looking for your clients. They're going to come looking for your clients because you are now a bone to be chewed. And so if you're expecting moral support or even legal support or any kind of help, it's not going to be there. And it wasn't there for Arthur Andersen. It wasn't there for Laventhal and Horwath before them. What immediately happens is there's a feeding frenzy, and everybody will come and say, hey, your firm is having trouble. Obviously, they have some breakdowns in terms of their business model, in terms of their control of their employees, et cetera, et cetera. Why don't you come to our firm? That'll be the first thing that they do. And they did. Okay. Could the WorldCom board have prevented the manipulations that were being applied? Where was the board in WorldCom? Anybody catch that? Let me pick on Gray here. You are now in the new group, Gray, and in your group, when you're talking about the board of directors of WorldCom, what was their relationship with Bernie Ebbers? They loaned him the money. Yeah, but they loaned him for a good purpose, right? They loaned him for, we talked about this last time, I think. Why did they loan him the money?
Collateral.
Right, and so when the stock price started to fall,
Shares.
yeah, yeah, it was like a margin call. It's like, okay, your collateral is degraded, so you need to put more money in the pot, and he didn't have the money, so they loaned him the money so that the stock price wouldn't fall further. So they were concerned about maintaining market stock price. So in a sense, when Bernie borrowed that money, and he borrowed the money, but he didn't necessarily use it for the purposes that they wanted him to or thought he was going to use it for. He kind of put him in a bind. He put him in a bind where they had to keep helping him because otherwise things would get much worse. And so the board of directors was that the right thing to do then, Greg? Should they have just said no in retrospect?
Did the board of directors do double salt office?
What did your group find out about that? Okay, was there any ramifications to the board from WorldCom? Catherine, any?
Did this early last week.
Okay, okay. Let me rephrase it. Was it legal, Sandra, for the board to lend Mr. Evers $400 million?
Is that in their jurisdiction?
Say again?
In their jurisdiction to do, like, are they?
No, yeah, this will be more of a federal thing.
Yeah, well then, like, ethnically, it's not right to give the CEO that much money. Obviously, they all have their own reasons to not see the stock price.
Okay, okay. Let me just put this out a different way. At the time, it was okay to do this. It is no longer okay to do this because of cases like this, situations like this. It is now, in terms of the SEC, it's like you're not lending management money. I'm not sure if there's any loopholes to it. I'm not a lawyer, but I know that one of the things that came out of WorldCom, as well as HealthSouth and some others, this is a typical way to create a captive employee as well. For example, if I hire Gwenny and she's my new CFO, I want her to come down to Atlanta where the organization is. I loan her $500,000 to buy a house. Okay, and so now as an employee, depending on the terms of that loan, I've got her, right? I've got her where I want because if I fire her, it might be that loan is due and payable. She'll have to go get money somewhere else. And maybe she won't have a job. So it might be a little harder to borrow money after I fire her. Okay. So I'm kind of creating difficulties. So sometimes these loans are basically, they can be used as handcuffs to get employees to go along with what I want them to do. And that's kind of what, it wasn't that situation with Evers. With Evers, there's a different motivation, but the point is those kinds of loans are no longer appropriate. I'll show you that here in just a minute. But they certainly could have made it easier for whistleblowers to be heard. To whom should whistleblowers, when you do whistleblowing, that means you're saying something's wrong. I see something in the organization that I think is illegal or unethical. So Jennifer, who should get that message? Should it be management? Should it be the board or the audit committee on the board or someone else? So if you've got a complaint with somebody in a company you go work for, you fill out your complaint on this form. Who's going to get it? That would be a different kind of whistleblowing. That's if you're going to the SEC. You could do that. You could do that. That would be an option. Okay. But if you're doing it inside the company, because companies are supposed to have, as of 2003, they're supposed to provide you a whistleblowing option internally to say, hey, you've seen something in the company, you don't like it. So who would, if you filled it out, the internal version of this, didn't go to the SEC, who would get that message? Would the president get the message? CFO, audit committee. The audit committee gets it, okay? And then the audit committee of the board then would notify the entire board, they'd review it, they'd kind of do their own review, and then they would tell the entire board. So the point is, who's not getting it? The management's not getting it, okay? Management's not getting it. And that's important because if you, later on, we're gonna look at the Wells Fargo case, and management got, somehow or another, they got hold of those messages, and they tormented the employees that were whistleblowing. It's a common thing in an organization with a corrupt, unethical environment. Is it that if you going to complain about things, they're going to make your life miserable. In fact, when you look at the Health South case, you'll also see that in the upcoming Health South case. The complaints don't they create a lot of problems for the complainer. So clearing up that option for the organization would have been very helpful if they had an empowered internal audit department. And the internal audit, they're supposed to also communicate to the audit committee and not be hired by management. They're going to be hired by their own staff. They're kind of an independent internal unit. Okay, they don't want to answer to management if they're internal audit. Okay, because management has their ideas of the way things should go, and we don't want that to occur. In this case, in the WorldCom case, can anybody describe, or let me pick on someone here? Haven't I called in a while? Sam? In terms of management, was there any relationship between Bernie Ebbers and board members?
Did they work together? Honestly? Or like were friends? Like it was a positive relationship?
Okay. Yeah, they're friends from way back, right? This is what they call the friends and family board, right? So all the people that were on the board were lifelong friends, went to church together, grew up together, you name it. Okay, that should be to auditors a red flag. Okay, just a red flag, not necessarily a problem, but it means that, and they all were making a lot of money because of Bernie's vision. Bernie was the guy. It's kind of like if you're in a rock band with Paul McCartney. He's pulling the train. You're just playing the drums, and you don't worry about it because the visionary is there, and you're getting rich just helping that visionary along. And that's the way this board was. They were there to help Bernie with Bernie's vision, and they knew it. Okay. So the big question was, and your group answered this question, why did the accountants go along with this? Why did, whether it's David Myers or Scott Sullivan or any of those groups, in your group, Elia, why was Bernie's excuse was, by the way, in court was, I'm not an accountant. I don't know what was going on. That's why I leave up to the accountants. So why did the accountants go along with this, Elia?
I think from the case, it looked like they sort of like envied the CFO. I think it's called Sullivan.
Scott Sullivan, yeah.
So in some way, from how I felt or how I saw it, it's sort of like they didn't want to let down their highly achieving CFO.
Okay.
So they also didn't want to risk their jobs.
Okay.
And again, I think if the CFO says it's okay to do this and saying that, we're going to correct it in the coming quarter, then you are sure that I think we are doing the right thing.
Yeah.
I knows what is doing.
Okay, so Kelly. So Kelly, I'm the CFO and you're an accounting manager. And I say to you, Kelly, here's the deal. I need you to make this adjustment. I know you might have questions about it, but trust me, this is what I need you to do, okay? If there's a problem with it, I'll take responsibility for it. Are you okay now with that?
I personally won't take that, but if I don't take that, I'm not feel.
Well, this is a problem, right? But what I'm saying is, if I say to you, Or Jacob, I say to you, don't worry about it. I'll take responsibility for it. Just do what I'm telling you. Trust me. I've got more years in this business than you. Just do it and you'll be fine. Don't, you're going to do it? Okay. Do you maybe see that maybe as a problem now? Okay, because Betty Vincent ends up in jail because of that. That's exactly what she was told. It's like, don't worry about it. I know I know she was, apparently the jury was convinced she knew or should have known, okay, that was not right. And that comfort from her supervisor should not have been sufficient. Okay. So you have to think about that. You really have to think about that, because that, to me, I try to put myself in Betty Vincent's shoes. And if my manager said, don't worry about it, it's on me, I think I would have just said, okay, it's on you. But I might have done like Claude said. I might have said, could you put that in an email for me just in case? Because, I'm a little, just no good reason, All right. So obviously, I want to show you David Myers, a snippet of David Myers, because I think it's a very powerful thing in terms of how he came to doubt himself. The convincing that was done by leadership to say, don't worry about it. It's not your problem. It's our problem. And, no sense of a larger duty. You know what I'm saying? No sense of a larger duty to the shareholder community or to the marketplace. Nothing of that nature was part of the staff. Check this one out on David Myers. I'm not going to watch the whole thing, but there's certain parts of this that are just, to me, very, very powerful, very instructive. Now, David Myers worked underneath Scott Sullivan. Scott Sullivan was as Elias said, he was the brains, but Myers was the sycophant. He did what he was told, but he did it with gusto. Okay. Hold on just a second here. By the way, if you end up teaching an ethics class anytime, David Myers will come and speak to your ethics class. So all these criminals do. Richard Scursi will come preach to your church too. All right. Okay, this is before their $100 million fine for cheating on ethics, okay? Just FYI. Okay, hang on, let me pull these things down. I'm sorry, I didn't. Why do we not have those all the way down? I am this may be dangerous. I might just say, watch it with half a screen and be happy. Because I don't want to go far out of here. Because see, I got the whole screen behind me, so I thought I just assumed that that was good here too. Okay. Okay, okay. Okay, you're pushing the limits of my technical knowledge here, so let's see if we can go back. Okay. This is where it gets good. let me jump ahead here. Anyway, I thought that was very, very powerful, very honest. Let's move on. I don't think of any of the things that I've seen in terms of this class and preparing for it over the years. I don't think I've ever seen anything as quite as um, honest as that. You know, he had to come to grips with the fact that you know, how he was persuaded, how he should have stuck to his guns. I think he also brings up a good point that that, you know, he placed way too much confidence in the people above him, and this was Scott Sullivan's pitch was that, hey, there's, you know, it's all going to correct itself. Don't worry about it. I take full responsibility. Of course, he didn't, and you know, there's not going to be. Don't expect anybody to stand up for you on those lines. It's an unrealistic kind of an immature sort of a way of thinking, and Myers bought into it, you know. And sometimes that's compounded by the fact that they're going to pay you a lot of money. We're going to see that in the Health South case, that, you know, if you pay your people a lot of money, that the golden handcuff kind of thing, you can buy their loyalty and get them to look away because there's more at risk for them. But Scott Sullivan, who was very successful, I have a little note down here. At age 37, he had a $19 million home. His pay was $19 million. He had a mansion in Boca Raton and all that kind of stuff. He looked the part. He looked like the genius that David Myers thought he was. But yeah, he got 5 years in prison for his, and he got only 5 because he ratted out Bernie Ebbers. Poor Betty Vincent, she just believed him. That was her big mistake. She believed that she wouldn't be responsible for it. They were smarter than her. And you know, you got the Sunday school teaching mother of I don't know how many children she had, but it didn't work out for her. And the judge said if she just would have stood up in the very beginning, all this would have stopped. All this would have stopped, but she didn't. So it's an interesting case, very interesting and sort of sad in that way. We talked about Bernie Ebbers and the loan and what was up with that. So I'll skip over that. But the board didn't do anything that they should have done to check on Ebbers. It was basically an audience trying to support his vision. That was a report that came out later, a governmental report that was trying to understand these things that were going on. You know, you could quibble about whether the board should have made the loan or not, but it wasn't illegal to do it at the time. They did it because they thought they were helping the shareholders at large. I probably would have voted the same thing, but what they should have done is they should have put more particulars into the loan agreement as to what he was going to do with that money. But they didn't. That was their big mistake. In terms of, and you're going to see this with Health South too. So as you're preparing for that with your group, you might want to think about this. Bernie Ebbers' board was what I call captured. They were a captured board. They were going to do what Bernie wanted. Why? Because one, there was that personal issue. They had business relationships with Ebbers outside of WorldCom. Some of them had financial investments. They obviously had personal relationship with him in the small Mississippi town. The private jet, one of the board members got to fly the private jet around as much, rented the private jet for $1. I think it was $1 a month for his personal use. That's a deal I would like. Okay, I said, yeah, I'm all for that. I'd be flying all over the place, and I'm sure he did. So the board of directors were also paid an unusually large amount for their role. So again, that idea that if you want to be a board member, you need to, the implicit thing there is, you know, you need to go along with leadership on this because you know, they can get you outed as the director. Now, just to let you know what's come out of this is it's now illegal for public companies to extend personal loans to executive officers. That's Sarbanes-Oxley. It's now the new rule that directors need to be independent. More than half of the directors need to be independent. Independent meaning they have no business relationships with the of a certain size with the company that they are a board member of. They also have, let's go on here, Audit committee members need to all be independent. Okay, and one of them has to be a financial expert for what that's worth. And that they do a look back. So if you ever, in the last 3 years, if you ever were not independent, then you can't be on the board. Now you can have board members that are not independent, but they can't be the majority. And they can't be on the compensation committee and they can't be on the audit committee. So those are the kinds of things they're doing to tighten this up. No more friends and family on the board. Okay, now some, okay, but not the majority. So that's, so when you look at these cases, whether it's Health South or Wells Fargo or whatever, you can see what comes out of these cases is, the marketplace learns and they eventually get their way around to, okay, we don't want this happening again. Okay, and so here's what we're going to do. And so a lot came out of Enron and WorldCom, and these are some of those things. Yeah, so in fact, today, the big investment firms, BlackRock and so forth, if they look at the board membership and if they if they're concerned in any way that the majority independent isn't really as independent as they would like, they don't invest. It becomes an investment criterion that you have a board membership that's actually going to hold management accountable for their actions and so forth. So it did change the world in that way. Okay, so let's move on. Oh, by the way, I like to do postscripts on these things. I did a postscript on Health South is pretty interesting. The postscript on WorldCom is a little bit interesting too. Bernie lost everything and he spent his remaining years in jail. They let him out in the latter part of his life because he was basically had dementia and was dying. But there's a very interesting thought about this. If you want to think on the other side of the coin of these disasters, there are a lot of people that were fans of Bernie from the get-go, and they don't feel that any of this was fair. So take a quick peek at this. This is a short one. I hate to do too many videos, but I watched this again, and I thought, this is an interesting point of view because we might think, Bernie Ebbers is a crooked guy or David Myers is a crooked guy. How could he do this? They're involved in this scheme and investors lost so much money. And then you start looking at it more personally, you look at their situation, you think, they made some mistakes and those mistakes blew up on them. It could have happened to anybody. Take a look at MSNBC's perspective on Bernie Ebbers when he passed away. It's a very short one, so hang on. they made a, I guess their point is they made a lesson out of Bernie after they had used him up for their purposes. They wanted those acquisitions. They wanted WorldCom to grow. They wanted Bernie to be a guy who had a vision that growth was right because that was his idea, and everybody believed in it, and everybody made money on it. And when it turned out it wasn't going to pan out, that was they had no more use for poor Bernie. That's another way to look at it. Kind of dark, but it is what it is. So let's talk about ethical workspace and try to tie this to this Health South case that's coming up. First of all, when you start talking about ethical organizations, Ming Hong, if you're hired, you're going to be getting a job sometime soon, probably, right? And how would you take the pulse to say, is this an ethical organization? What kind of questions would you ask, or what would you look for? Give me some idea of anything that you would think, okay, this organization has a strong ethical code and or not.
For the ethical.
Yeah, I mean, well, you would ask questions and about what?
So just like the moving say about the insurance part or
What kind of insurance?
for the work. So is this can be the work as a student or work as just people who I just means so what my personality and what is my role to
Okay, I'm going to kind of interpret what you're saying because I'm not exactly sure, but I think you're trying to say what kind of environment it is for employees working there, broadly speaking.
is just like all on the it's all right and
Okay. So an ethical organization would provide for their employees reasonable salaries, reasonable protections, a path towards success, and things like that, right? They wouldn't just try to use and abuse their employees. That would be kind of first order business, I guess. That's the first thing I'd want to know. How am I going to be treated, right? How am I going to be treated? Connor, what would you look for inside that ethical organization? Now, what was that firm you work for?
It's like great, like in high school and college, I stocked beer for Anheuser-Busch distributors.
Okay, and for a distributor then. Okay. All right. So if you're going out now, looking, what kind of things would you expect to see to say, okay, I can tell this is an ethical organization?
I'm not trying to like screw over clients. I think there's an active. I don't think it's much like obviously the goal is to make money, but at the same time, like you're not doing it in a way that you're maybe taking advantage of people in a really bad way.
Okay, now I'm not going to admit to that, and you're being an awkward question. Do you screw over people? So we're going to have to come up with a different way to take the pulse here. All right. So give me some ways you could take the pulse without asking him that embarrassing question.
You could ask maybe, what's your management style like? I don't know.
Okay. All right. We're scratching here.
What's your client relationships like? Like I don't know.
Okay. Well, good. I got you raising an issue. Like, okay, how do you tell it, Prathana?
I would Google search the company to understand if there's any lawsuit, anything like, how they're treating their employees.
Okay.
their understanding.
No, that's
One on the top, like, understand that.
okay. That's great. I like that. Anybody hear of Glassdoor? Anybody search Glassdoor, where you get a lot of ex-employees will comment on the job environment and so forth. When we get to Wells Fargo, we'll see some funny comments on Glassdoor that basically things like, this is the great place to work if you have no ethics at all. Kind of think, okay, yeah, I guess that's a tip off of my, but yeah, that's, lawsuits would definitely be a teller. Sandra, were you gonna say something?
Yeah, I was gonna say like mandatory ethics training for UI. Like as interns, you had to go through that.
Okay.
We're actually touching it.
Okay, that's a great point. If you talk to many organizations now, and especially in the accounting world, they have mandatory ethics training. And also they test you to make sure that you actually uh, viewed the instructions and can answer the questions and things like that. So it's like at WashU, I take an ethics test every year. I've got to take basically an ethics test and pass it. I'm not sure what would happen if I didn't, but you usually get a couple extra tries. So yeah, certainly that would be part of it. Anything else along those lines? So yes, they have ethics training. Okay, that would be good. You could ask them about that, and that would be a question they would have to answer. You say, hey, how do you just in terms of work life and stuff and management of employees, do you guys do this kind of thing? Okay, good. Anything else?
The core values of the company, and the mission, like.
Okay. You can look at their ethics statements themselves. That'd probably be online. And in fact, I'm sure it'll be online. What they say their core values are. Could you put a lot of faith in that, though?
It's
Yeah.
part of.
Yeah, that's one of those things that's kind of it's easy to say, right? But it's a lot harder to do and to live. Okay. Um, any other thoughts on, okay, how would you take the pulse and say, okay, this is an organization devoid of ethics. I better stay away from this, guys. Yeah.
The guy was like, you could, I guess, like ask someone that previously worked there,
Yeah.
just being like, oh, like how was the person above you? Was like their management style good? Were they, just like respectful or
Yeah.
were they like really mean?
No, that's a good point.
That's good.
When I was talking about General Electric in the Jack Welch era, you'd find out, yeah, they're going to fire you at the bottom 25% no matter what. Now, you might think that's not an ethical issue. You might just think that's a competitive issue. That's the one, but it's something that's out there, what their practices are. So I've got my list here of things. Code of conduct was mentioned. Ethics training was mentioned. You also, they have a compliance officer, probably do, who's overseeing this, because that's actually a big problem with ethics. And one of the things you might notice in all of these cases is kind of like an audit issue, like a fraud issue. For the company to really get ripped off or for a big problem to occur, top management has to get involved. Okay, the boss has to be in it one way or the other. Okay, either explicitly or implicitly, and because they're the ones with access to the big decisions and the big money. The people at the lower levels, they can't get access to the big money, and they don't make the big decisions, and consequently, we don't hear about those kinds of things. So here's the problem, and this is why compliance officers are important. Who's watching the boss? Who has the power to bring the boss to heel? When I'm talking to the boss, I'm talking the CEO, the CFO, vice president for sales, whoever it is, because no one underneath them. We just saw that with WorldCom. No one underneath them is going to tell them they're wrong because they want to keep their job, as we were talking. They don't want to. They're going to lose their job, or at best, they're going to get flatlined. Means they're never going to get promoted again. So since that's the case, how does the organization bring ethics or hold to ethical standard the people at the top? You have to have someone in an executive level compliance position that when they get the whistleblowing message gets to them, they can actually act on it. Okay, and that vice president can get fired, that CEO can lose their job or whatever. Because absent that, you're just wasting your time. You're wasting your time because if the top people are involved in it, there's no one that is going to hold them to account. Okay, so this wouldn't be something you'd necessarily be able to get in a conversation, but certainly internal audits going to be investigating concerns. Whistleblowing policies will be there. Ethics hotline for anonymous tips, that's actually required these days. Ethics statements signed by employees, that's sometimes part of your contract. Then the part that might be more on a conversational basis would be do they actually enforce their policies? Again, it's one thing to have a policy, it's another to enforce it. So when things get out of hand, let's say you have a vice president for sales who is using the travel card to take customers to adult entertainment venues. This happens every now and then. It happened to Nike. It happened here locally. I remember there's a story of a local vice president that would take customers over to a certain I'll just call it a strip club. I don't want to call it a gentleman's place because there are no gentlemen in there. Took them over to a strip club. But here's the thing that was odd about it. And this is in the newspaper. He spent $200,000 at that strip club. Now I'm trying to imagine what kind of service you get for $200,000. He spent $200,000 and he wouldn't have got caught because nobody would do anything about it. He'd been doing it for some time, but nobody underneath was going to say something. And the only reason that he ended up getting fired was because he actually protested a charge. And in protesting the charge, the problem went to a different person in the organization who actually could get something done about it. And so it's kind of like, I wonder what he protested. Now I'm very curious. But anyway, so point is, it is a big issue. And are they enforced? Are the ethics guidelines and disciplinary, are they backed up by discipline? Okay. Okay, and if you wanted to, as part of your discussion of your contract, is ethical behavior included in performance evaluation? So, not exactly sure how that would work, but it could be brought up. Now, in terms of an ethical structure, this is something that's from your text. I think it's worth thinking about. This is a very typical situation in terms of the structure of an organization, right? You've got your shareholders. Now, your book is really big on stakeholders. Okay, stakeholders, everybody in the world that's not a shareholder. Okay, and they talk about stakeholder interests and so forth, and we'll get into that probably in our next session. But the board oversees the organization, obviously, and the key point here is that the whistleblower information needs to go to the audit committee and to the board of directors that way. And management is not involved in that network. They may be apprised of they're going to hear about it eventually, but they're not going to hear directly from the whistleblower. It's going to get filtered through from the board of directors who'll take action on it. The other thing that's interesting in this organization is that the internal audit in particular is working with the audit committee, which is not an insider. Those can only be outsiders to the organization. So they're going to hear about any problems with internal control, any problem with any sort of fraud within the organization, maybe not necessarily large, but any kind of internal theft or things of that nature. It's going to go to the audit committee, which will report it up to the board of directors. Again, the internal auditor is not reporting directly to senior management. Okay, they're not hired by senior management. They're not fired by senior management. They're operating on a different level, and that gives them the freedom to check into potential abuses and unethical behavior within the firm, and that's important from an ethical work structure. Okay, the other things are pretty common, in terms of organizational focus. So how does the organization prevent malfeasance from the executives? So we just talked about that, so I don't need to spend a lot of time on that. But that ombudsman, that executive person who is accountable for ethics problems reported about executives themselves. Now, I'll give you an example of that. And I might have mentioned this earlier in the semester, I'm not sure. But I was at a conference with some military people, and they were talking about abuse of government credit cards in the military. And I do think I mentioned this to you, but it was interesting to me that if they find that the leader of the organization is doing something wrong, they're violating policies, that they will then look at everybody underneath that leader because they're going to assume that everybody's going to follow the lead. And so that's an interesting audit thing. It's also a practical ethical issue inside the organization. If the executive is doing the wrong thing, it's a safe bet the others are doing it too. Okay. So the duty of officers is there's a duty of care, there's a duty of loyalty. You might not know this, what these officers, these board members and officers are supposed to do. They have these duties. They have to act in good faith. They act like a prudent person in the management of the organization. They should work in the interests of the organization as opposed to working in the interests of other corporations, other organizations that they might be part of. Okay. They have a duty to do a good job, good faith, right? Good effort to pay attention. Every now and then you get board members that are called, there's an old saying about some board members, let sleeping dogs lie. In other words, if the board member is inactive, they're just not paying much attention, they're sleeping, just leave them alone. Go ahead and make decisions without them. That's not as common today as it used to be. But they do have the duty of good faith to maintain a watchful eye over corporate activities, to be actively exercising decision-making in support of the organization. So, and I'll give you an example of where this duty of loyalty fails. And it's kind of a personal example because I remember when it happened because my brother flew as a pilot for US Air. And so they had a couple new board members come in because of an investment by British Air. Now, US Air became American Air eventually. They got bought by American. But before they got bought by Americans, they were having some financial difficulties. British Airs bought a stake in US Air with the idea that they would soon be merging. So this was good news to my brother, who was a pilot, because the company was struggling. And he thought, well, this will be good. British Air, US Air will make a powerhouse, all this good news. And it turned out that those two board members from British Air had only one objective, and that was to get information from the inside and use it to help British Air, and they had no interest in US Air at all. So that ended up becoming a lawsuit. So that's where you can see the duty of loyalty failing big time, and that became a lawsuit, which US Air ultimately won. There's also a sole interest rule with regard to directors and officers, where you can't, you are to work in the best interests of the shareholders and not for your own personal best interests. An important guideline also is, directors and officers are in a difficult position these days because they can be sued as well for bad decisions. Okay, they can be sued for things that they do and don't do. Give you an example. Right here in the St. Louis area, the board of Boeing got sued because the Boeing, I think it was the 777, kept crashing. And so I think it was in Nigeria, was it not? Yeah. So anyway, the lawsuits, one of the lawsuits that ensued was the board members were actually sued for not paying attention to the quality issues that were going on in the construction of the planes. And so, ultimately these things end up getting settled, but this is why any board member today that has any sense at all, they will require, so if you get invited to be on a board, make sure you do this. Tell me about your directors and officers insurance in case that we get sued. Okay, nobody's going to be on board without very heavy D&O insurance, right? Because I don't want to lose my personal, because this is going to come out of their personal pocket. They're being sued personally, and so that's kind of that has become, just an absolute necessity. Okay, and you might recall this also on this same vein when Elon Musk was wanting to buy X or Twitter. I guess now it's X, right? It was Twitter beforehand. X, wow. anyway, he was making a good offer, and the marketplace, a lot of the shareholders were liking it, but the board wasn't interested in accepting his offer. And so it was very interesting to me that Elon came out and he said, "Hey, isn't the board supposed to work in the best interest of the shareholders? I don't think they're actually doing that, because this offer is really, really good, and they're not going on. They may not want to sell to me because I'm me," says Elon. "I understand that, but they should work in the best interest of the shareholders. And if they're not, they might want to get, if I were a shareholder, I'd want to sue them now." And all of a sudden, the board members got a lot more pliable, a lot more less concerned about anti-Elon sentiment and more concerned about shareholders. So he knew what the rules were. He knew what they had, how they had to operate, and he kind of exploited that to get them to be more agreeable in the negotiations. So what does the director do in terms of all these management of the organization? They need to safeguard the interest of the shareholders. They need to review business strategy. That's a big piece of what you think the board does. They have to compensate the executives. There's a compensation committee. That's kind of a touchy thing, right? That's anybody here familiar with interlocking directorates? Heard that term before? Okay. All right. Well, in terms of compensation, this is where things get a little funny. You've probably heard the term the old boys network and back scratching and so forth. So here's the way we'll do it. Elia and Tubey and Gray and I, we all meet at the golf course all the time, and we all have our companies. We each one of us has companies. So I'm going to get Gray on my board and Tubey and Elia, and they're going to be on the compensation committee voting my pay. But I'm also going to be on their board voting their pay. Okay, so if we work this out just right, we'll always be doing a very good job and getting paid a good bit of money, right? Because Gray's going to vote for me because he knows I'm going to vote for him. And this is what they call interlocking directorates. And it has been a problem, and it's still around. It's still around. If you see a common thread between the same people that are on each other's boards, it creates that kind of conflict. Okay. They should be part of, especially through their audit committee, evaluating internal controls, hiring the external auditor. That's what the audit committee does. Evaluating the external audit, hearing the complaints of the external auditor, what the problem is, as well as the internal auditor. Ultimately, the board is the one that's going to sign off on the financial statements that go to the SEC. And just generally monitor the overall performance of the company. Okay. So because the board can be so influential, we see it as a problem with Bernie Ebbers. It was a problem with Enron because in Enron they were just asleep at the switch. We're going to see it as a big problem with HealthSouth because most of them have business relationships with Scrushy and so forth. So how do we keep these problems from occurring where the board isn't working in the best interest of the shareholders? They're working in the best interest of themselves and management and anybody but the shareholders. And so one of the things that is now common is conflict of interest policies that, that anybody that's on the board, their firm can't be working for the company. So in other words, if I'm an attorney, then my law firm can't be representing them. Or if I'm an accountant, my accounting firm can't be their auditor, kind of thing. So you get into, those are conflicts of interest. I'm on the board, but my company is doing business, my firm is doing business with the company. That's problematic. Now you can still have it. It just has to be disclosed, and the board has to agree to it. And you can't have that. That's an independence problem. You can't have too many non-independent directors. You can only have so many. It has to be less than half. Okay. So a lot of problems And these are the independence requirements now from the New York Stock Exchange. I had mentioned before, more than half have to be independent. And big question then becomes, what's independent? What do you mean by independent as a board member goes? Not like an accounting, it's not the same as you see in accounting regulations. It's from a perspective of the stock exchange. To be independent, your company can't get more than 200,000 or 5% of your gross revenue in the last 3 years from that company. Okay. So in other words, if I'm doing business with a company and it's over 200,000 basically, I'm not independent. I could still be on the board, but we can't have too many like that. Okay. Because we can't be the majority. Now in Health South, you're going to see, I think you'll see, if you do a little bit of background, you'll see a lot of those board members did business with Health South, and this is trickier thing. What if the board members have a separate business interest with the owner, with the CEO in a third firm? Okay. In other words, I don't do business with the company I'm a board member of, but I do have with the CEO a third interest. And so and I'm sure that if you look into the more details on the stock exchange rules, you're going to see that it's typical that they would encompass that. I know that in the auditing rules, they encompass that I'm not independent if I'm auditing someone and I have a separate business interest with the management team over somewhere, in a different venture. That's still lacking of independence. Okay. Let's see here, just a few minutes left. I mentioned this before, so I can't be, I'm not independent if my company that employs me is doing business with the company that I am a board member of. So that's all fine and well. And let's close on this. The audit committee is a different animal inside of the board. They're the ones that hire the auditor. They also determine the auditor pay. They're the ones who get the whistleblowing messages. They have to be independent. They can't have someone who's not independent on the board these days. Trying to think of anything else about them in particular. But that shores up. That's important. The reason that's important is this. In terms of those audit failures, one of the reasons that those audit failures occurred, remember we said, here's why we're here. We said there's a bunch of audit failures. One of the reasons those audit failures were said to occur was that management was putting pressure on the accountants to go along with things that were wrong. Management would basically say, so if Hao Cheng is my auditor, I say, Hao Cheng, if you want to keep this audit, you want to keep these fees I'm paying you for this big audit and that's making you rich, I'm going to put this work out for bid if you don't see my way. Okay. I need you to be more flexible. I need you to help me out here a little bit because there's a legitimate disagreement about the auditing standards and here are the accounting rules and I think things should be this way. I need you to go along with me. Right? I'm sure Arthur Andersen had to go along with WorldCom. And I'm sure that they had discussions about it. And Arthur Andersen bended to what was going on. So one of the reasons because of that kind of behavior, the Sarbanes-Oxley Acts put this out. Okay, audit committees are independent. And in this way, management theoretically can't pressure the auditor. So I can't pressure Hao Cheng anymore because he's dealing with the audit committee. They're all independent. Even though I'm the president of the company and I want to fire him, I don't like what he's doing. I theoretically can't do anything about it because he is hired by the audit committee. And that was designed to shore up independence, which is considered very, very important in the board and in these kinds of decisions. So that was a way that Sarbanes-Oxley was trying to comfort the market community and say, hey, listen, we're taking pressure off of the auditors so they can do the job right. They're not going to be under the same financial pressure because outsiders are going to determine who hires the auditor and who retain, how the auditor is paid and how they're, whether or not they're retained. Now, that's a little bit of a pie in the sky thing because I still hear, and if you read anything about this, you'll still hear the CEO will lean on the audit committee and say, so if Hao Cheng's my auditor and I'm the CEO, I'm going to lean on my internal my audit committee. I'm going to say, hey, listen, I really don't like Hao Cheng. Could you really get rid of him for me? So and usually they're going to go, well, sure, why not? And so there's some talk out there in the market and in the community that it really doesn't stop the problem. Okay. All right, so let's close on that. What I'm going to do next time, give me 1/2 of a minute here. We're going to wrap up a few things on this, talk about corporate social responsibility at the front end briefly, but mainly on Thursday, we're going to get into HealthSouth. So be ready for it. That's what's going to come right out of the gate, okay?
Serve every day.
Happy this day is over. Yeah, it's been had like a presentation right before. And I was like,
I just walked.
yeah. I just like I went to last week class.
I always
Right
like
up
check
here,
right
yeah.
here. I'm like so tired.